authorised the annexation of Hawaii, at that time a sovereign, independent republic, previously a kingdom ruled by its native dynasty. United States Marines invaded Hawaii to protect American business interests and to enforce American rule. Filipinos felt that something very similar had happened to them and were determined to fight. Thus, in 1899 began the Philippine-American War. The Philippine irregulars, again led by Freemasons Emilio Aguinaldo and Antonio Luna. But the American war machine, having cut its teeth fighting Mexican and American Indian guerrilla fighters, was impossible to defeat, and the supply of arms and ammunition dried up. General Aguinaldo was arrested by General Fuston on March 1901 and was imprisoned in the Malacanang Palace, where he was well treated by the military governor, General Arthur MacArthur, a fellow Freemason. Whilst many Filipinos supported Aguinaldo's armed struggle against American rule, others decided to appeal to the American sense of democracy and justice, for it was well known that many Americans felt a sense of outrage that the United States had turned itself into an imperialist power under the presidency of William McKinley. Thus, in July 1899, Ambrosio Flores, Filipino Grand Master, appealed to American Masons to use their influence to end the war and recognise the independence of the Philippines. Brother Rafael del Pan was delegated the task of coordinating a media campaign involving prominent American Masons such as Mark Twain to sway the American public opinion to the Filipino cause. American Masons in the US Congress and Senate sponsored bills to restore Filipino independence. However, President McKinley seems to have been ahead of the play in the respect that in the 20th of January 1899 he appointed the first Philippine Commission, the Sherman Commission, to expedite the government of the Philippines from military to civilian authorities. This was followed in March 1900 by the Second Commission with legislative and executive powers, and Freemason William H. Taft was inaugurated as the first civil governor. William Taft popularised the ideal of Philippines for the Filipinos, and he worked for the passage of the Philippine Bill of 1902, establishing complete civilian government. This could only effectively lead to government by Filipinos because there was only a very small American resident population in the Philippines, and there was no attempt to establish a larger one apart from the purely military establishment. It should be noted that President McKinley himself was a Freemason. He was assassinated in 1901, and Theodore Roosevelt, also a Freemason, became President of the United States of America. At the start of his term, President Roosevelt proclaimed complete peace in the Philippines, and Filipinos began to organise political parties. The first Filipino legislature, formed in 1907, consisted of a majority of elected Filipino representatives, with Freemasons Sergio Osmeña as Speaker and Manuel Quezon as Majority Leader. The first Filipino legislature was followed in succession by 7 more, concluding in 1935 with the formation of the First National Assembly. There can be little doubt that the acquisition of the Philippines represented a crisis of conscience for American democratic ideals. Whilst the reasons for fighting the Spanish-American War was consistent with the United States policy of ridding the Americas from what was probably rightly regarded as the oppressive control of European imperialist states, resulting in the independence of Cuba, the acquisition of the Philippines as an accident of the Treaty of Paris ran contrary to the traditional United States policy, and it was soon realised, even by President McKinley, that the United States had bought quite literally a hot potato, but one in a world still dominated by imperialism, which had strategic significance in the Western Pacific and Southeast Asian region. The United States therefore structured government of the Philippines on the lines of a commonwealth, governed jointly by Filipinos and Americans, but ultimately under the control of the United States, and forming part of the American strategic military presence in the Pacific, along with Hawaii and Guam. With the appointment in 1913 of Francis Harrison as a Freemason as Governor General, independence became a real possibility. Harrison worked for the Jones Law, or the Philippine Autonomy Act of 1916, which declared the stated purpose of the United States was to recognise independence as soon as a stable government could be established. By the end of his term, Harrison had seen to it that 96% of government posts were in Filipino hands. Even so, Filipinos continued to apply political pressure on the Americans to deliver on the promise of independence. Several missions were formed to work for independence, and most of these were chaired and manned by Masons. Masons especially prominent in this work were Manuel Quezon, Pedro Guevara, Rafael Palma, Sergio Osmeña, Camilo Osias, Emilio Trías Terona, Rafael Alunan, Teodoro Yanco, Filemon Perez, Maximo Calor, Arsenio Luz, Jorge Vargas, Thomas Earnshaw, Seferino de Leon, Quentin Paredes, Jose Abad Santos, and Conrado Benitez. They sought to influence Masons in the United States government and the media. Their efforts came close to achieving results when in 1916 Senator James P. Clark, a Freemason, introduced an amendment to the Philippine Bill which would grant independence within a few years. Though passed by Congress, the amendments were defeated in the House of Representatives. In spite of disappointments, the Filipino political missions persisted and secured the passing of the Hair Horse Cutting Bill independence measure, which however was vetoed by President Herbert Hoover. However, a mission led by Manuel Quezon secured the passing of the Tidings-McDuffie Law in 1934, which called for the Constitutional Convention to frame the Constitution for a Commonwealth government and also for the final withdrawal of the United States. This law was approved by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, a Freemason. And the first National Assembly of the Philippines Commonwealth was inaugurated in 1935 with Manuel Quezon as President and Sergio Osmeña as Vice President. American influence on Filipino Freemasonry. Relations between Filipinos and Americans were for the most part amiable once the fighting had stopped and Filipinos began to realise that the American administrators were inclined to support the desire for independence. Filipinos began adopting American activities that appealed to them, such as basketball and baseball, and the country progressively became distinctly more Western in character, whilst retaining some Spanish cultural connection and its own Filipino traditions. Filipinos benefited from American science, technology, industry, agricultural techniques, and especially from education. Politically and socially, American rule ensured freedom of association, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, freedom of the press, and political freedom consistent with democratic ideals, and at least in principle, equal opportunity. Filipinos played a dominant role in every facet of social activity, including commerce, education, and the professions. From the point of view of the Filipino Freemasons, freedom of association meant freedom from oppression, and they set about reinvigorating the craft. They discovered to their surprise and satisfaction that several of the American military and civil leaders were not only Freemasons but supportive of Filipino independence aspirations. Amongst these were Generals Arthur MacArthur, Harry Bandots, and James Harbord, and also John Pershing, although at the time he was a captain, not yet a general. The American Masons began erecting their own lodges. The American Military Lodge was formed by United States volunteers from North Dakota. The Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Missouri warranted a lodge composed of Negro soldiers, and the Grand Lodge of California created the Sojourners Club, followed by the Manila Lodge number 342, the Cavite Lodge number 350, and the Corregidor Lodge number 386. The Americans also introduced the Royal Arch, the Scottish Rite, the York Rite, the Mystic Shrine, the Knights Templar, the Order of the Eastern Star, and the Order of Demole. The Grand Lodge of Scotland weighed in with the creation of Lodge Perla de Oriente, and Chinese Masons, number 134 in Manila, and the Cebu Lodge number 1106 in the Visayas. There were even lodges of Chinese Masons who, while keeping very much to themselves, claimed kinship with worldwide Masonic fraternity. Filipino Freemasons were not idle. Ambrosio Flores attempted to establish the Filipino Grand Orient in 1899. The reactivation of the Modestia Lodge number 199 meant the return of the it should be Grande Oriente Español, Castilian it should be, no? Grande Oriente Español, whilst Dr. Trinidad Pardo de Tavera introduced the Grand Orient of France. The Philippine Grand Orient was established by Jose Utor y Fernandez. Also established were the Grand Orient, the Gran Oriente de España, and the Gran Oriente Lusitano Unido, that's Portuguese. Thus, in a very short space of time, Freemasonry in the Philippines found itself confronted with a confusing array of Grand Lodges and a matching disparity of policy concerning the admission of members on racial considerations. For instance, the American lodges initially admitted only white Americans, but the Scottish lodges would accept both Americans and Filipinos. Neither the Americans nor the Scots would have anything to do with the Prince Hall Masons. The situation was partially resolved when the American lodges successfully petitioned their mother lodge, the Grand Lodge of California, for permission to form their own Grand Lodge. In 1912, the Grand Lodge of the Philippine Islands was established and the American lodges renumbered. Americans were active in encouraging Filipinos to become Freemasons, among them Manuel Quezon, who joined the Sinuquan Lodge number 273. Other prominent Filipinos joined the craft, including Rafael Palma, who joined the Bagang Buhay Lodge number 291, and Juan Sumolong, who joined the Gran Oriente de España, and later the Dagumbayan Lodge number 4 of the Grand Lodge of the Philippine Islands. The fragmentation of jurisdictions did not last long, and by 1914 the lodges had coalesced into two main bodies: the Grand Lodge of the Philippine Islands, consisting almost entirely of white Americans, and the Regional Grand Lodge made up of Filipinos. The two Grand Lodges fused in 1916, when Most Worshipful Brother William H. Taylor was elected as Grand Master. Its successor, however, was a Filipino, and this started a tradition whereby the Grand Mastership alternated between Americans and Filipinos. In this way, the Grand Mastership was held by Manuel Quezon, Rafael Palma, Quintin Paredes, Wenceslao Trinidad, Francisco Afán Delgado, Teodoro Callo and Vicente Carmona in succession, but alternating with Americans. Freemasonry in the Philippines has been heavily influenced by American Freemasonry. The web form of ritual was adopted, as was the American setting out of the lodge room, which is quite different from the layout used by Freemasonry in the British tradition. Affiliated orders of American origin, such as the Mystic Shrine, Demole and the Eastern Star, became very popular in the Philippines, and especially the Scottish Rite, which in the USA itself is a very popular and wealthy order to which most Masons aspire to belong. Now, Worshipful Masters, that's about halfway through. The next section takes us into the Second World War. Would you like a break now?
Or... Yes, that's halfway through. Yeah. 3/4 minutes.